Saint-Lô, France, 25th of August, 1944. Before dawn, engines throbbed under blackout at Saint-Lô as painted red discs marked each turn. Fuel drums stood in rows to the horizon. The U.S. First and Third Armies risked empty tanks and silent guns. A nonstop road artery would decide whether the advance kept moving today. German staff officers had predicted the Americans would stall for lack of logistics. The Red Ball, a railroad term for priority freight, moved to roads. The Red Ball Express, priority truck convoys named for rush freight trains, ran from Saint-Lô to Chartres, a fast lane feeding the pursuit east. This was the test. Fuel cans lay empty at the front while dispatch riders hunted for more. Artillery units rationed movement to save gasoline for the next fire mission. The chase after a shattered German line faced a simple threat: stopping. After the Normandy breakout, armored columns outran their railheads, forward rail supply terminals. By early August, U.S. spearheads drove beyond repaired tracks and temporary sidings. Air interdiction, deliberate bombing to disrupt transport, had smashed bridges and yards across France. Trains could not reach the pace and distance the battle now demanded. Cherbourg could receive ships, but its cranes, quays, and rail links were damaged and slow to recover. The beaches still worked, yet surf, tides, and handling limits kept throughput below the appetite of two fast-moving field armies. The supply map had bulged east faster than the delivery system could stretch. Every mile gained by the tanks extended a fragile tether. Mechanized warfare burned fuel at scale that stunned planners. A Sherman tank used roughly 2 gallons per mile. A 2-ton truck got about 6 miles per gallon. POL, petroleum, oils, and lubricants, became the new ammunition. Gallons decided whether guns and tracks would move tomorrow. German assessments had wagered on this moment. In staff studies and briefings, they portrayed U.S. logistics as brittle at long distances, over-reliant on trucks and ports. If the Americans raced, the Germans argued they would outrun their lifeline and stall. The remedy, in German eyes, was to force them to chase. Inside the supply chain, the levers sat with Lt. Gen. John C. H. Lee. He commanded the communications zone, the Rear Area Logistics Command, COMZ. Depots were full in Normandy and Brittany. The roads forward were not. Engineers reported weeks to restore key rail bridges over the Seine and its tributaries. Combat commanders demanded answers in hours, not weeks. Gen. Omar N. Bradley and Lt. Gen. George S. Patton Jr. pressed hard. Their headquarters sent urgent totals for daily fuel and ammunition, with routes already plotted to the Seine. Bradley wanted to sustain a broad advance. Patton wanted depth, and depth meant gasoline above all. Both men understood that the window to trap German forces was measured in days. Lee weighed the options. He could slow the advance to match rail repair schedules and port clearances. He could allocate fuel by ration, privileging certain corps while idling others. Or he could move the railroads onto the roads. The last option was radical only in scale. The choice was a protected, one-way truck highway from to Chartres. Outbound loaded convoys would occupy one set of roads. Inbound empties would return on a separate set, eliminating opposing traffic. The distance, about 160 miles, 260 km, one way, sat within a single long shift for a trained driver. Chartres would become the roadhead. A forward truck served supply dump, feeding the next jump east. From there, smaller convoys could fan out to core dumps and division trains. Military police planned bypasses around choke points and signed detours to keep columns moving. Gasoline in cans, packed on open beds, would be the lifeblood. The name already existed. On U.S. railroads, a red ball marked priority freight. Lee's staff took the symbol and moved it to signposts, orders, and convoy placards. The Red Ball Express would mean no delays, no cross-traffic, and no local vehicles on its lanes. It was a promise written in paint and enforced by MPs. The concept depended on speed, discipline, and relief. Drivers would run in escorted packets at fixed intervals, day and night. Maintenance crews staged along the route with tow trucks and spare parts. Breakdown meant a swift pull to the shoulder, not a halt in lane. Every minute saved in motion multiplied across thousands of wheels. Orders locked on the 25th of August, 1944. The corridors opened under blackout. Supply officers shifted gasoline, rations, and small arms ammunition to St. Lo loading points and cleared non-essential traffic from the route. In effect, the rear area created a rolling pipeline. It was a calculated gamble. If the roads clogged, German predictions would come true on French soil. If the convoys held their rhythm, the U.S. advance could leap the Seine before the enemy reformed. The test began with engines in line and miles to cover. Engines idled in a dim orchard while drivers crowded a canvas tent. Outside, red discs on posts glowed under hooded lamps pointing east. The plan was simple and unforgiving. Run a road-borne pipeline or watch the advance die. A captain read the route and the rules. The promise was speed, not comfort. Briefings covered pacing, breakdown drills, and night procedures in clipped phrases that left no room for doubt. Then the men filed out into the dark, climbed into trucks, and waited for the column to move. The backbone of the route was the GMC CCKW, US-2, a half-ton cargo truck, the workhorse of the route. It was a 6x6 with a simple straight-six engine, a winch on some models, and racks for spare tires and tools. Its rating was honest off-road, but convoys often exceeded it on pavement to cut trips and save days. Beds brimmed with 5-gallon jerry cans, tied down with rope and chained to the top rails. A full can weighed about 40 pounds. A neatly stacked load could push the line between efficiency and abuse. Drivers knew the sound of a spring protesting and drove to keep it from breaking. Discipline made motion continuous. Convoy orders fixed intervals, locked speed, and forbade passing except to clear breakdowns. Cat-eye blackout lights, slit-covered lamps for night driving, kept columns stacked in steady, dimmed lines. The rule was to keep the cat-eye ahead centered and hold the throttle where the schedule demanded. MPs, military police traffic controllers, posted at junctions and checkpoints, enforced one-way flows and blocked local traffic. Red discs marked every turn and bypass. Fatigue played tricks on judgment. Signage stripped map reading out of the equation. Radios at dispatch points and field phones, wire-connected telephones used by troops, at control posts, synchronized launches so that loads returned just as empties arrived. The people who made it move came from units built to move things. Transportation Corps, Army branch for movement by land and sea, drivers and quartermaster, Army branch managing supply and services, teams made up the Corps. Many soldiers were reassigned quickly from other duties, given a short course in convoy rules and roadside maintenance, and sent forward. The Army was segregated. Roughly 3/4 of the drivers were African American soldiers, placed where the need was greatest and the schedule left little room for ceremony. In briefing tents, that mix faded into a single task: keep the trucks rolling. By first light, departure chalks, numbered groups scheduled for movement queued. dispatchers started the clock. Support sat every few miles to keep the lanes clear. Wreckers, heavy recovery trucks with crane and winch, idled near known choke points with mechanics and spare tires. Fuel points were set up along the route so trucks did not detour to refuel. A breakdown triggered a drill. Flare, rope, hook, pull to the shoulder, and swap to the wrecker's spare if it fit. The convoy did not stop. It flowed around the wound and closed the gap. MPs at the next checkpoint logged tail numbers and phoned ahead so a replacement truck could fill the space at Chartres without breaking cadence. The goal was always the same: never let the lane go cold. The loads were prioritized with a hard logic. Petroleum, oils, and lubricants went first because gasoline determined the reach of guns and tracks the next day. Ammunition followed because ammunition decided how those guns spoke. Rations and medical supplies rode behind, spread through the day to avoid starving any unit in the net. Tanks wanted gasoline in cans more than bulk tanker fuel. Jerry cans could be manhandled, counted, and issued at roadside under shell fire. A 2-ton bed stacked with cans beat a tanker if a bridge went out or a detour ran through a farm track. Speed and modular loads were a safer bet than elegance. The numbers sorted the paradox that worried planners. Trucks burned fuel to haul fuel. On a typical day, a round trip ran about 320 miles. A CCKW got roughly 6 miles per gallon. It used a little over 50 gallons to get out and back. A truck stacked with about 125 jerry cans carried roughly 500 gallons. Even after the burn, hundreds of gallons reached the roadhead. Scale paid the margin. At peak, about 6,000 trucks and more than 20,000 drivers kept the corridor moving. As long as speed held and lanes stayed clear, the net flow overwhelmed the cost of motion. The strain showed as hours stretched. Duty cycles lengthened, relief lagged, and accidents rose with fatigue. Blackout driving punished depth perception. A missed curve could mean a ditch, a broken axle, or worse. Rain turned verges into traps. Dust hid cat eyes in the face of the sun. Maintenance teams worked with whatever they had, swapping tires in minutes and bending fenders clear of rubbing tires to get a truck back in column. Some days read like triage: keep the most trucks running, accept a percentage in the ditches, and move on. The clock did not slow for repairs. Organization absorbed the chaos and turned it into flow. Simple signs, fixed rules, and a control network kept thousands of moving parts in a single rhythm. Local commanders felt it in arrival times, not in slogans. A dump officer at Chartres could look down a lane of dust and know that ammo would come after gasoline, then rations, and then medical crates, because that is how the dispatch board had set the day's pulse. The German prediction had been elegant but static. This was crude, flexible, and faster than the rails could ever be on broken bridges. By night, cat eyes threaded past fields and villages as MPs waved columns through, and wreckers harvested the day's losses. By morning, the road had spilled gasoline east as fast as depots could stack cans on beds. The trucks made a railroad without rails. Ahead, the Seine and the German rearguards waited for proof that the pipeline could hold. At first light, the columns rolled without a pause at the St. Lo roadheads. Trucks eased onto the outbound lane, noses tucked under cat eyes, engines steady. Military police waved them through and shut gates behind them. The opposite flow never appeared. Returning empties had their own sign path home. The run stretched roughly 160 miles to Chartres and back again by the separate corridor. At the roadhead, depot troops had gasoline, ammunition, and rations laid out to match the day's sequence. Drivers counted off their loads, grabbed a sandwich and a tire check, then swung their trucks back west. The turnaround was measured in minutes when the plan held. Throughput rose hour by hour as spacing locked in. The first packets learned the turns and set a rhythm. Wreckers hooked breakdowns fast and kept lanes clear in minutes, not hours. It looked simple because the hard work sat at the edges, not in the middle of the road. By the third day, daily lifts reached several thousand tons and climbed. A number like 10,000 tons meant the mass of roughly 500 average freight cars. France's wrecked rail network could not deliver that much to the same point at the same speed. A marked lane of trucks did it by repetition and control. The fuel tide reached forward dumps in time to keep Third Army spearheads moving. Armored commanders measured success in gallons on hand and miles made good. Patton's advance pivoted from the Seine, crossing to the Moselle River in northeastern France and Germany. On that flow. Meanwhile, First Army drew ammunition and petroleum, oils and lubricants, to press east of Paris and keep pressure on a retreat that had few pauses left. Engineers guarded key bridges with sentries and quick repair teams. They patched road cuts, filled shell holes and shored shoulders where heavy axles chewed the verge. If a culvert sank, they were there with cribbing and gravel. Their clock matched dispatch, not the surveyor's pace. Night did not stop the loop. Blackout runs stitched the same line under hooded lights, the cat eyes faint but enough. Luftwaffe interference was minimal. Allied fighters dominated the daylight, and German fuel and aircraft were scarce. The greater danger came from fatigue and darkness, not from the sky. Dispatch watched the route like a heartbeat. Reports from MPs and depot clerks fed a simple board that tracked intervals, columns, and choke points. When a village square backed up, a bypass appeared the next cycle, signed with red discs and a fresh arrow. When a hill chewed brakes, a tow truck sat at the crest before the next convoy arrived. By early September, the loop pulsed day and night without gaps. Drivers knew the curves by smell and the timing by feel. Third Army maintained momentum to the Moselle line and fought for bridgeheads with fuel that had started as cans in a Normandy orchard. Commanders began to plan the next push with a schedule in hand, not a hope. Dusk settled over a low ridge outside Chartres as a column crept by, engines humming, exhaust hanging sweet and sharp. Hooded lights washed over stacked fuel cans and tarp-covered crates. German officers had said this road-borne lifeline would choke as distances grew. What followed settled the bet in motion. The stall never came. By mid-September, near continuous convoys, nose to tail, ran day and night. At peak tempo, the loop put close to 6,000 trucks on the route at once, and lifted around 12,500 tons per day. That daily mass matched more than 600 typical freight cars, delivered without a rail. The opening weeks alone pushed well over 100,000 tons forward. The centerpiece was gasoline in the humble jerrycan, 5-gallon steel fuel can, easy to handle in bulk. Tens of millions of gallons moved that way across the campaign, one can at a time, because cans could cross weak bridges, jump detours, and feed armor from the shoulder of a road. Millions of cans changed hands, were drained, and returned to the west for refilling in an unglamorous but relentless cycle. The cost showed on faces, fenders, and ledgers. Fatigue crashes rose, especially in rain and on blackout runs, as depth perception failed and ditches waited. Mechanics scrapped burned engines and rounded out clutches rather than rebuild in the mud. Tire casualties mounted as overloading and heat peeled tread from carcass. The convoy that never stopped paid in steel and bone. Command adjusted. Rest cycles hardened from suggestion to order, with enforced layovers and hot meals at turnarounds to steady hands and eyes. More wreckers staged at hills and junctions, reducing a blocked lane to a brief slowdown. Staging discipline tightened, cutting bunching that had created accordion crashes and brake fires on long grades. As September wore on, the bottleneck moved rather than widened. Engineers reopened rail lines into Paris and beyond, and road control shifted heavy cargoes back to trains that could now roll over repaired bridges. Fuel pipelines extended inland from the Channel coast into the Seine basin, taking bulk flows that trucks had carried at great cost. The loop did not disappear. It focused on priority items and last-mile delivery where speed, flexibility, and redundancy mattered most. The lesson was not subtle. Simple rules, centralized control, and ruthless priority beat distance on broken terrain. German staff studies had assumed the American system could not reconfigure at speed, that ports and rails would define the ceiling. They misread the scale of U.S. motorization, the depth of spare parts and rubber, and the ability to turn traffic control into a weapon. Road power closed the gap their models had left open. One more truth sat behind the wheel. African-American soldiers, about 3/4 of the drivers, kept the tempo through the worst weeks. They worked in segregated units and lived under unequal policies, yet their truck companies logged the miles that made the schedules real. Awards and commendations followed, belated and uneven, but the record did not depend on ceremony. The immediate consequence was momentum. First Army and Third Army crossed the Seine, and then the Marne with stocks that did not dip into the red at dawn. By the time the Moselle fights hardened, the red ball had already proved the premise. A road could act as a pipeline if commanders treated it that way. As the main arteries shifted east, new protected routes spun up on shorter axes, borrowing the same rules and the same signage to sustain pursuit across France. German divisions looked over their shoulders for trains that never came. The Americans brought their own railroad on wheels. At Saint-Lô, red discs marked the turns and engines idled as the first convoy rolled. The road moved what rail could not when it mattered most. Facts on the odometer answered forecasts on the map, day after day. Momentum held because fuel, shells, and food arrived on time. Proof was motion.